And hey everyone, welcome back to our continuing coverage of ethnic politics. Now, this week is chock full of extremely important information, and looking over the assigned readings, I realized that some of it might be a bit over some of your heads. Now, that's not meant to insult your intelligence. I just come to realize over the years that some of the most important scholarly writings seem to almost be deliberately written to be just jargonistic and confusing. But worry not, worry not. One of the things that these lectures tend to do is take the important stuff, flesh it out, explain it to people in layman's language, and by the end of this, you should come away knowing a lot more about the role of narrative and the importance of culture and symbol that go into it. So the readings that go into this week's assignments, I mean, there's some heavy hitters. I mean, these are some major contributions to the study of political culture, ethnic identity, and the role of memory. Now, memory is going to be a big thing that we're going to walk away from in this lecture. Benedict Anderson's Imagined Communities. I mean, this is just a book that I take it upon myself to assign for almost any class that focuses on the role of political culture. I will freely admit that Anderson is not the easiest of reads, and as an anthropologist, he tends to provide far too many examples when he wants to explain something in detail from a writing or a saying that's not in English by not translating it. So if you know French or German or Indonesian or Balinese or whatever, great, you're good to go. If you don't, you have to kind of rely on, Google Translate or, the material that I'm going to be providing in this lecture. But his chapter, Old Languages, New Models, gives us a critically important understanding of the concept of print capitalism, right? And if you read the chapter, and you might not have understood everything that he mentioned, if you walk away with an understanding of the term print capitalism, and then you walk away from this lecture understanding what print capitalism means, well, you're going to be in great shape for the rest of the semester. So that's one of the reasons why I assigned Anderson. It's a difficult chapter, but it is, wow, just one of those heavy hitters that just, I just get blown away with every single time because of the importance of this concept. Murray Edelman's 1998 article, Languages, Myth, and Rhetoric, also furthers our understanding of the importance of not just the spoken word, but the meanings that go into a language that someone is born into and uses language as a form of group identity, right? So I think you're already beginning to see a pattern here, right? The role of language, specifically a language that is codified for, let's say, national purposes, right? And I'm sure that you all have, know about, modern languages, national languages, right? State-sponsored languages, right? These are, spoken words that come with a specific set of grammar and understanding and meaning that have been deliberately crafted and standardized for people within that country. And so the importance of language goes not just into the spoken word, but the meanings and the understandings of words, phrases, and readings of history. Now, here's another thing, right? Readings of history is very, very, very important in using, in thinking about a microanalytical understanding of culture and ethnic identity. And then finally, which, if I think about this, I should have assigned Ross at the top as opposed to the bottom. We are looking at the next chapter of his book, The Political Psychology of Competing Narratives. So I kind of hinted in the previous lecture that we are going to be looking at the importance of narrative, right? A way of understanding things, a story, right? But narratives can oftentimes be competitive, especially between two or more groups that, will oftentimes claim, let's say, the same historical justification, territory, or different understandings of some event, right? So when we, let's say, refer back to last week's reference of the 1992 Los Angeles riots, we could say that there are three broad narratives that describe it, right? The African American narrative, the Korean American narrative, and the white narrative. And all three of them depict the same event, but from the point of view of a different sociocultural, sociopolitical, and socioeconomic group. And within these groups, right, the narrative kind of affirms and reinforces one's assumptions, readings of history, and prejudices of the others. And when these narratives oftentimes come, I don't want to say clash, but when they come into contact with each other, we begin to see that there are differences in opinions, different readings of the past. And if that were enough, that would be, just all fine and good. But when this stuff is translated into some form of political action, we begin to see how this moves into competing political factions, and organizing around different political parties. So I'm not going to lie, this is an important week. And, I'm using the second full week of class to basically give you some real heavy-hitting things. So I got to tell you, if you found the readings to be somewhat difficult, please make certain that you still read them. But if you walk away from this lecture and you walk away from Wednesday's class discussion feeling that you know a little bit more about this stuff, the rest of the subsequent weeks are going to be a lot easier. So I'm just telling you, just devote some time and energy to listening, taking notes, and understanding what we are about to jump right into. So, we left off last section. We left off last class with a couple of preliminary assumptions about the role of culture and ethnicity within political action and political movements. The first thing that we effectively walked away from is the idea that ethnic politics is a form of group identity, right? Group identity that shapes, directs, and orients members of said group to think, act, behave, and react in certain ways. And so this is nothing different that we've been talking about for, let's say, the last 5 or so 10 minutes here. But if ethnic politics is a form of group identity, it already is sort of a macro measurable unit of narrative. And oftentimes, right, competing group identities that embrace values and beliefs that conflict with others leads to ethnic conflict. So in other words, different ethnicities are not inherently prone to conflict and fighting. But what leads some groups to fight others over different groups is the way in which they perceive identity, the way in which certain elements of history, certain territorial, claims, certain political views oftentimes clash and compete. So with this in mind, right, there is some positive good news about culture, right? Culture is neither inherently progressive or retardant, right? So when people like to have you believe that, there is some kind of inherent progressive, optimistic sense of cultural attitudes and beliefs among whites, and, black culture tends to be more reactionary, more oppositional to things, that's, obviously false. Culture is, well, largely whatever socio-political elites choose to make out of it, right? So our discussion of the two faces of culture last time led us to, lean towards Abner Cohen's Culture as Practice, which gives us, the mobility to understand, culture can be used and abused by people in power. Culture can be a resource, it can be a tool to get groups to think and act and behave in certain ways, which oftentimes can be done for political purposes. But yet, at the same time, remember, culture, identity, ethnic beliefs, they have to come from somewhere, right? They can't just simply be made up. So within that discussion of the two faces of culture, and within our understanding that from let's say a political science point of view, we start with practice because we like to think that culture is a tool or a resource. Just by that alone, we think, well, people in power can just kind of make up whatever they want and they can get people to just go along with, whatever. But thankfully, half of our class is full of psychology majors, which, again, I just want to say you guys are more than welcome in this class. You would probably gravitate more towards the writings of Clifford Geertz's Culture as System, which would have us, which would remind us that, hey, you can make stuff up and you can manipulate and you can direct and you can shape, but there's a certain degree of non-negotiable truths that every group begins with, right? You cannot just simply remake the laws of physics. So in this case, what are the cultural laws of physics for a group? The language that they speak, the religion that they embody, certain key national symbols, certain indefensible pieces of territory, certain historical events that, once again, are considered to be the core DNA, sort of the master narrative of what the entire group happens to be. Now, within that group, there can be nuances, there can be different interpretations, there can be different political persuasions, but we all agree on a certain number of what I will once again say non-negotiable truths. There's your culture as system. Once you get that down, well, you can be as creative as possible with Cohen's culture as practice. Okay, so with all of that said, right, let's jump into the material of this week. And the recurring theme in this week's readings is the relationship between language and narrative. And I want to use narrative as the focal point here, because narrative is a rather pervasive understanding of what and why and how people think and believe and behave. And narratives are things that we oftentimes don't stop and think are created, constructed, or shaped. We're just kind of, if we're born into it, or we just kind of accept that narrative at face value, we, in a way, just believe the narrative to just be inherently true. So what am I saying while I'm showing you this picture? This picture depicts an interesting element in not American history, but American myth. Okay, so within this picture, right, you see what looks like a father, kind of, sternly but lovingly, kind of talking to his younger son, who is trying to explain some dastardly deed that he did. And if you kind of look on the ground here, you'll see that there is an axe. And of course, unfortunately, the picture breaks off by the frame here, but it looks like the husk of a tree. This picture depicts the legend, and I emphasize legend, not history, but the legend of George Washington and the cherry tree. Now, I don't know how many of you remember hearing this. You might have been taught this in school. You might have picked this up somewhere, media, movies, cartoons, whatever it happens to be, right? I don't even remember where I heard it. I think I might have gotten it out of a Bugs Bunny cartoon back in the day. But in any event, the legend effectively goes as follows. Little George Washington, right? You all know who he is, right? First president, guy on the dollar bill. Here he is, little George Washington right here, right? One day decides, for reasons that are only his own, to go out into the backyard of his parents' vast, estate with an axe, and for, again, whatever reason, to make the story go along, chops down one of his father's cherry trees. Okay? Could have been the favorite cherry tree, could have been the only cherry tree, it doesn't matter. A cherry tree was chopped down. At some point, either right after the act or sometime later in the day or whatever, his father finds out that the tree has been cut down and goes to his son and says, George, did you cut down my cherry tree? And the legend, the myth that we all know, is that Washington turns to his father and says, "Father, I cannot tell a lie. I chopped down the cherry tree." And that's kind of the end of the story. I mean, you can kind of fit it on half a page. I mean, I really embellished this thing, right? But the question to think about here is, did this really happen? Like, did little George Washington ever cut down his father's cherry tree? And the answer, the right answer, is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if he did it or not, because the legend of George Washington and the cherry tree is not interested in depicting anything historical, but it's a way of trying to tell a story, convey a narrative about George Washington, who in American political culture is nothing short of one of the greatest Americans that's ever lived, right? And if you think about this, in American culture, especially American political culture, George Washington is kind of like not just one of the founding fathers, he's like the founding father, right? There's nothing wrong about him. He is remembered as a war hero, the first president, the standard bearer of modern American politics, right? Democrats, Republicans, right, left, everybody, effectively looks at Washington and sees him as this country's Caesar Augustus, sort of like the president upon which all subsequent presidents are modeled and evaluated on, and there's a few presidents since him that have come close to Washington's stature, probably Abraham Lincoln being the most, likely. So the thing is that it doesn't really matter if Washington ever did this, but the important thing to take away is the story. The idea that here's little Washington who cut down his father's cherry tree, and is he rebellious? Maybe. We want someone to be rebellious who is going to rebel against the British. Was he a little bit destructive? Well, maybe he was more inquisitive than anything else. But here's the important thing. The one thing that always goes into this narrative is the following answer, right? When George is asked this question, he says, "Father, I cannot tell a lie." That's the one thing that I remember that was, imparted on us when we were in school. And why is that important? Because even at a young age, Washington was regarded as honest. He owned up to his actions, right? He didn't blame it on Antifa. He didn't blame it on Russia. He didn't say that it was, some international Jewish conspiracy that the tree collapsed, right? He didn't blame it on the liberal media. He basically was like, yeah, I cut down your tree. And you know what? There could be a number of reasons. It could have been that, I don't know, I felt that the tree was dangerously leaning towards the house. It could have been just like, hey, you know what, Dad? I just want to see what happens when I put an axe to a tree. Screw you. But I own up to it. So he's honest. And that's what we want in one of our founding fathers. So you see, the narrative around this might not necessarily be something that is inherently historically accurate. But what matters is the lesson, the moral, the thing that we learn from the story. And that's what makes a narrative different from just simply an historical reenactment. And, to a Canadian or to an Italian or to a Syrian or to an Uzbek, do they really care about George Washington and the cherry tree? No. But as far as we as Americans are concerned, right, official American political culture is all about this stuff, right? Because Washington is a flawless character. And even when he has his vices, well, those vices can be turned into virtues because, yeah, he's human as well. So what I'm trying to get at here, and this is important to note, in fact, I'm going to stop and just say, look, if you get only a few small things from this lecture, ladies and gentlemen, please get this one slide, okay? So it's time to pay attention, perk up, and write this stuff down. We are talking about the importance of both symbols and narratives, right? So it's definition time. What is a narrative? I've been talking about it previous lecture. We're talking about it in depth now. In so many words, I define a narrative as a conscious connection of previously unstructured and possibly even unrelated events, figures, and ideas into a seemingly imploded framework of logic and reference. Now, that was me at my academic peak, more than 10 years ago when I was writing an article about this stuff, right? But it's a nice academically jargonistic way of saying that a narrative is, for all intents and purposes, a constructed story, right? A story that takes bits and pieces of things that actually did exist, right? So in George Washington's sense, it was him himself, right? His father, some kind of, early aristocratic plantation or whatever it happened to have been. And we use bits and pieces of things. We might cobble them together, what I like to call Frankenstein them together, to create some kind of collage, some kind of photo bash that is deliberately put together to convey a message. Right? That's the whole thing, is that the narrative is a story. It's a way of explaining things. It's a way of identifying certain things, right? Now, narratives by themselves can't really go all that far. Narratives oftentimes need symbols, right? Visual representations, in order to provide, as I like to say in the definition here, the characters, the props, the special effects, the direction, right? The tools of narrative, right? That's what a symbol is. A symbol functions as a tool of a narrative, right? And these tools can be both tangible and intangible. So tangible symbols, right, are, monuments, periodic annual commemorations, rituals, things like that, right? Who makes it? Who gets to be a statue in national parks? What names get streets named after them? And this is kind of neat as far as New York is concerned, because like every other street, you probably just take these names, for granted. But there's a history behind them. There's a history behind the name DeKalb. There's a history behind the name Delancey. There's a history behind the name Fort Greene. I'm not going to get into it right now, but if you ever wanted to figure out what is the origin of the name DeKalb on DeKalb Avenue, you find out and you realize, it was some, Dutch, French-Dutch guy that fought on the American side in the War of Independence. Now, is there a street named after Benedict Arnold? No, right? He's the consummate traitor, despite the fact that prior to him defecting to the British, he was an ardent American patriot. So what kind of led him to defect and then, go to Britain afterwards and live happily ever after? Well, we don't really know. All that we know is that Benedict Arnold is the consummate traitor in American history. So symbols function in both tangible tools as well as intangible. Now, here's where things get a little bit more, psychological, sociological, anthropological. Feelings of belonging, feelings of patriotism, right? Symbols, intangible feelings of tradition. So let's just say, for instance, the American flag is both a tangible and an intangible symbol. It is a tangible symbol as our national flag and one of the paramount national emblems. But what you feel by looking at the American flag can oftentimes invoke different feelings and meanings. For some, it is unbridled patriotism. And even within that, right, unbridled patriotism can be good as well as bad, right? For others, it could be imperialism. It could be foreign domination, right? So it's the emotional aspect that, give symbols even more importance to defining and augmenting narrative. So if a narrative is the story, the screenplay, right, symbols are the characters, the props, the special effects, the direction. And the two together effectively form some of the atomistic building blocks of cultural and ethnic identity. Now, here's the big question. Can there be more than one narrative for a group? Can there be more than one narrative for a country? Absolutely, right? Absolutely, right? That's the entire point of political symbolism, right? If a symbol, especially a tangible symbol, just kind of sits there, a statue, a monument, a flag, something like that, right? By itself, the symbol is just kind of, sitting there or, just minding its own business. But what we get out of that symbol oftentimes invokes different narratives. So, for instance, right, especially more so now than in the past, statues and monuments to Christopher Columbus. I will be perfectly honest with you and say 20, 30 years ago, nobody gave it a moment's notice. Nobody really cared. Christopher Columbus was just some dude that quote-unquote discovered America, and if you were lucky, you were in a school district that got the day off. Today, 2020, 2021, right, Christopher Columbus brings in a myriad of narratives. Some people defend him to the death. Others want to expel him and expunge him from American history because of all of the horrible, horrible things that the man committed. So in this sense, narratives are used for a series of socio-political discourses, democratic or otherwise. Hence the reason why, let's say, you can even find, let's say, the symbolism of the word socialism in modern day America. For some people, right, socialism immediately invokes images of, bread lines in the Soviet Union and Venezuela. And why do people know that? Because Fox News has basically told them so. And for others, socialism is affordable public transportation, accessible public health, organized and empowered unions, 8-hour workdays, dental plans, weekends, mind you, yay, type of thing. So the thing to take away from here is that narratives, as I've been saying, they can be multiple and sometimes they can be competitive. And when the narratives are competitive, well, that's when things get a little interesting, right? I mean, take a look at the many narratives of America, right? The most paramount one, the most official one, is that, America is the land of the free. Right? The land of the free. We are the good guys in everything. We are some kind of unique civilization that was started by a number of pilgrims and colonialists that wanted freedom or whatever it is, right? And that's what we've been doing sort of ever since, right? The land of the free, the home of the brave. We're the country that may not start wars, but we end wars. In fact, speaking of, fighting wars, we can divide the world really into two camps. A smaller camp, the part whose ass we saved, and a larger camp, the part whose ass we kicked, right? It's just kind of that whole, Team America, World Police, Make America Great Again type of narrative. Another narrative, very similar, but a little bit more moral, philosophical, is the whole city on the hill. And this was a term that was coined back in the 17th century by I believe it was the Puritan minister Jonathan Winthrop. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty certain it was Jonathan Winthrop, who, in the Massachusetts colony kind of noted that this settlement is it's like a biblical city on the hill with a light that shines out as a beacon to all, peoples around the world to, come towards. And I don't think any symbol represents that city on the hill with the light that shines out more than the Statue of Liberty that is just right, off of our shores. The Statue of Liberty, which, at least as far as American political culture was, when immigrants coming on the boat, again, we're talking about 100 years ago, right? When immigrants come on the boat, they see the Statue of Liberty, they all rush towards it. They're all crying because they're so happy that they're here, that we're in the land of opportunity, the land of freedom. I mean, that's the whole thing with the statue. I mean, the Statue of Liberty is literally staring away from the landmass towards the ocean. If you go to Liberty State Park in New Jersey, you get a good view of the Statue of Liberty, but she's got her back to us. Why? Because she's looking towards Europe, towards Africa, towards the rest of the world. Right? So these are two narratives that can define the United States. Narratives that are a little bit more mundane and maybe a little bit more critical is that the United States is the society of the spectacle. Right? We don't have high culture. It's like, Greeks have, pottery, coins, and columns. The Italians have Roman architecture and roads. The French have artwork and opera. The British have, I don't know what the British have. What do the British have? The British have an empire, whatever it is, right? What does America have? America, what are we known for? I mean, we're known for fast food. We're known for pop culture. We're known for cowboy movies and Michael Bay blockbuster films. We don't really have a high culture. And you know what? We're totally cool with that. Whereas Europe has like this refined culture, we have all-you-can-eat shrimp buffets, right? And look, let's be perfectly honest here. If I was to tell you that I'm going to subject you to one of two things tonight. The first is that you're either going to listen to a 4-hour opera by Richard Wagner, or I'm going to take you to an all-you-can-eat Chinese buffet. I'm going to bet dollars to donuts here that you're going to go for the Chinese buffet before you go for the Wagner opera. And in that sense, right, the narrative of American culture is defined by consumerism, the acquisition of material goods, neon lights and fast food and, fast cars and all sorts of public indulgences. A fourth narrative is that the United States could be the world's policeman, both for good and for bad. Like I said before, the United States may not start wars, but we end wars, right? We're the cavalry, right? We go in when, other people are fighting a war unsuccessfly. And, even though this has been now, largely disproven in the past 20 or so years, we still like to think that, we just won World War II. We are the Rohirrim that rides to the rescue of Gondor in that epic scene in Return of the King, right? Where we all charge the orcs and drive them into the river or whatever it is, right? I mean, that's just what we do because of the memories and the narratives of our involvement in World War I and World War II. So, even decades later, we have this idea that when the American military gets itself involved, the war is going to be over pretty soon. Now, you could take that in the opposite direction and say, well, yeah, and that's the problem, right? The United States has too much exposure and too much extension around the world. It is an empire that, doesn't liberate. It just kind of changes regimes to its own benefit and national interest. And, while we're talking about American foreign policy, a final narrative, and again, these are not all definitive, these are just the ones that I can think of, is, the empire in decline. And this has effectively been the United States, I would say since the 1990s, but definitively since the War on Terror, right? Since the 9/11 attacks. Unfortunately, there is more and more reference to, the United States today as, late Rome. We're talking about Rome in the early 5th century, or some people are even saying, the Soviet Union in the 1980s, unfortunately before Gorbachev, so we're in the Brezhnev, Andropov, or Cherenko period, where, we watched that show. There was this, you remember this HBO show about a year or two ago, Chernobyl? Remember, it came on just like right after Game of Thrones? And, the Chernobyl show did in like 5 to 6 weeks what Game of Thrones failed to do in 5 to 6 seasons. It was just that good. And, you're watching the show and the message is, the unbelievable stubbornness of the state in acknowledging what is a major human catastrophe. And, a lot of the viewers that are watching this were like, well, I'm so glad to know that I'm living in America because this would never happen. And the other half of the viewers are like, dude, are you kidding me? This is exactly what would happen in the United States. The state, the media, the elected leaders would do everything possible to hide a complete nuclear meltdown because, God forbid, we should show the world that we're complete incompetent fuck-ups. And this is effectively the narrative of the empire in decline. Now, do any of these narratives correctly describe the United States? No. But do they describe the United States to some degree of accuracy? Yes. That's the beauty of narrative. Narrative doesn't necessarily have to be historically accurate. Narrative tells a story. Narrative conveys a message. And here's where things get even more wonderfully problematic. The narrative, which is an interpretation of past events, is oftentimes taken as is by followers more than empirical, factual history. You try to tell people what actually happened or what actually is, they'll fall back on the narrative and defend that narrative, if that, I wouldn't say necessarily say to the death, but yeah, they'll dig their heels in and defend that narrative. Thus, right, all of that said, big convergent moment. Narratives and symbols are instrumental in the formation of, here we go, big vocab word, write this stuff down, collective memory. Let me repeat that again. Narratives and symbols, these are the building blocks that are instrumental in the formation of collective memory. Collective memory. What exactly is collective memory? Big term that we're going to be covering this week and in subsequent sessions. Collective memory, and this is my definition of this, isn't so much what we remember, but more importantly, how we remember it, right? How we remember it, how we interpret something from the past within a collective group identity framework. And so within that understanding, right, collective memory is the emotional quality that we ascribe to events, places, peoples, symbols, and ideas, right? The emotional quality, the subjective element of that. It's more than just simply facts and figures and history, but it is adding characteristics to that history, adjectives and descriptions and personalities to people, right? In this sense, it places particular emphasis on certain elements of the past, while giving passing reference, downgrading, ignoring, or even denying others. Now, here's where things get really interesting, because in this sense, collective memory is not interested in straightforward history. And here's the hot take. Most groups are not interested in straightforward history. They might say they are, and they might want you to believe that their understanding of history and identity is rooted in fact. But more often than not, it is a subjective, selective memory of the past. So if it places emphasis on certain elements while downgrading, ignoring, or even denying others, then that is a narrative. It is a narrative that is trying to embellish some things for memory while deconstructing, defanging, detoxifying other elements. Okay? And look, here's the thing about collective memory. Most individuals, right, cannot directly remember some of these big things as a part of their own history, right? So, you think about, what year you were born, and you think to yourself, okay, do I still find some kind of emotional attachment, some kind of important association with something in my collective memory? And again, it could be national, it could be religious, it could be linguistic, it could be cult, whatever it happens to be, right? Whatever it happens to be. Let's say something happened to your group identity a century ago, 2 centuries ago, right? You will still identify with that event because it shapes your values and your preferences. So, for instance, if you are Jewish, like you specifically, you have no working memory. You have no connection, no direct connection to the Holocaust. But that is still going to define who you are. And it is still going to be seen as something that you are obligated never to forget. And it's the same thing if, let's say, you were Armenian, right? The Armenian genocide took place more than a century ago, but the genocide is a front and center symbol and narrative to all Armenian identities today, right? And they still feel emotional attachment to that horrible, horrible event, especially because a counter-narrative to the genocide is coming officially from the government of Turkey, which wants you to believe that nothing ever happened. and that narratives of the Armenian genocide are nothing more than Armenian propaganda. So in that case, a competing narrative makes the narrative of the genocide all the more important to maintain and preserve, right? So individuals can't directly remember events as a part of their own history, but these things are still a part of their identity and shapes their values and preferences. If you are Egyptian, you will look at the pyramids and say, that's not historical, that's ours, right? That's ours. Now, you are separated from the pyramids by at least 4,000 years, if not more. And if you are Egyptian, right, you're like 75% Muslim, 25% Christian, none of you are offering, burnt sacrifices to Osiris or whatever it is, right? But still, that's yours. If you're a Greek, you'll look at the Parthenon. Or even more so, you'll look at the Church of Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, Constantinople, and you'll say that that's yours. At the same time, a Turk will look at Hagia Sophia in Istanbul and say, that's a mosque. That's ours now. The Greek will say, yeah, it's yours now, but it was ours to begin with. It started out as a church. The Turks will say, yeah, but we now have it as a mosque. So there, right? Competing narratives keep certain symbols highly politicized and continuously contested over. Now, let's go back to our boy right here, Christopher Columbus, right? You want to talk about competing narratives and collective memories, right? I mean, when I was growing up, I didn't really think much of Columbus. If we were lucky, I think we had the day off. I forget what, some Monday in October. I think it was a floating holiday. It was like the first or second Monday of October, whatever it happened to have been. And, we know, if you know anything about Columbus, right, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. He came on 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria. I don't know why, but everybody wants us to believe the names of these 3 stupid ships. And he, quote unquote, discovered America. Now, did he really do that? That's a narrative. The answer is no for 2 reasons. One, he didn't actually land in mainland America. He landed on the island of what is today Haiti and the Dominican Republic. So he landed in the Caribbean. So he didn't really discover America. And secondly, you can't really discover something that has already been inhabited by people for at least 35,000 years, right? So it's like, well, he discovered America for Europe. It's like, well, congratulations, Europe. You finally got on the same page that the indigenous people have been on for at least, 30 millennia, But today, right, the question is, do we celebrate Columbus Day? Do you want to wish people a happy Columbus Day? That's kind of politically risque today. But what's funny about the people who defend Columbus, they tend to be of a certain political persuasion. They also tend to be of a certain ethnic persuasion. Now, for reasons, again, that you have to do process tracing, one of the big defenders of Columbus are the Italian Americans, right? The Italian Americans who advocated for Columbus to be elevated to this national status as a way of proving to what was then a very critical and wary American population about the shifty Italian that was oftentimes associated with crime and vice and mafioso and other elements like that, right? The Italian-American groups in the United States wanted to elevate Columbus to be one of the preeminent Americans who came from Italy. Now, that's not entirely untrue, except for a couple of things. One, Columbus was born in what would eventually be Italy, but when he was born, Italy didn't exist. If he was, quote-unquote, Italian in any way, he's Genoese, right? Columbus comes from, at least we know he was born in or closely near the Italian city of Genoa. Now, he's born in the 15th century. Italy doesn't become Italy until the 19th century. But he spends pretty much his entire professional life working for and living in either Portugal and Spain. So his primary language that he spoke, if I'm not mistaken, was Portuguese. And he didn't discover America for Italy or Genoa, but he did it for Spain. So it just so happened to have been that he was ethnically Genoese, which, if we connect Genoa to what it is now today, yes, retroactively speaking, he's Italian. So the Italians discovered America. And the best part about this is that the overwhelming majority of Italian Americans in the United States come from southern Italy, right? They come from Naples or Sicily or Calabria. They come from everything from like Naples on south. Columbus, back in his day, if you were ever to ask him, hey, Columbus, what do you think of Sicilians or Napolitan? He would be like, barbarians, Africans, whatever it is, right? And there still is this little snobby thing, between northern Italians and southern Italians. But all that is lost, right? All of that is lost within the grand narrative of the Italian Americans basically saying that if you are against Christopher Columbus, his day, you're, discriminating against Italian heritage and culture. And it's like the people that are protesting against Columbus for what he did when he landed, in the Caribbean, and how he effectively enslaved and spread disease to much of the native population of Hispaniola, to the point where they've been, I think, almost effectively driven into extinction. Well, when they're criticizing Columbus, they're not burning an Italian flag. They're not saying, screw Italians. But again, the narratives and the way in which he is understood lets you to fall on a number of certain principles and certain beliefs. In fact, you know what? I think the best way for me to describe this is to provide you a skit from this one episode of The Sopranos, which, back in the day, again, you might remember The Sopranos, you may have watched it on HBO, I know it's kind of past your time now, but nothing describes the different competing narratives of Columbus on Columbus Day than this following skit. So let me just take a quick break and send it to you, and I'll embed it in this video, and we'll come right back.
Oh, Massachusetts!
Listen to this shit. The New Jersey Council of Indian Affairs has announced plans to disrupt Monday's Columbus Day Parade in Newark. Council Chairman Del Redclay, professor of cultural anthropology at
Stop blowing
Rutgers,
your nose. I want to hear
says
this.
council members and supporters will lie down in the path of Columbus Day marches, quote, in protest of Columbus's role in the genocide of America's native peoples, unquote. To launch their protest, the Native Americans and their sympathizers plan to begin a death watch tomorrow over the statue of Columbus in Christopher Columbus Park.
Some fucking balls bad-mouthing America, especially now.
I thought Columbus was the hero of America.
Oh, see, it's these Indians and the commie fucks. They want to paint Columbus as a slave trader instead of an explorer.
You gotta admit, they did get massacred, the Indians.
It's not like we didn't give them a bunch of shit to make up for that.
Land, reservations.
And now they got the casinos.
The fuck we ever get we didn't have to work our balls off for?
I wouldn't mind sitting on my ass all day, smoking mushrooms and collecting government checks.
You know what it is? I'll tell you what it is. It's anti-Italian discrimination. Columbus Day is a day of Italian pride. It's our holiday, and they want to take it away.
Fuck them. But I never liked Columbus.
Hey, what?
In Napoli, a lot of people are not so happy for Columbus. Because he was from Genova.
What's the problem with Genoa?
The north of Italy always have the money and the power. They punish the south since hundreds of years. Even today, they put up their nose at us like we're peasants. I hate the north.
Jesus, take it easy.
I'm gonna take action here.
So you see, there's at least three competing narratives in this skit, right? The Italian-American New Jersey narrative about, Columbus being an Italian-American hero. The competing narrative of the, indigenous peoples, and yes, I will euphemistically, bring them in, the commie fucks that want to rebrand, that want to demonize Columbus, which in many cases are bringing up actual historical information. And then you got the one Italian. The one actual Italian in the group that's basically saying, I don't care about him at all, right? If you go to Italy and it's like, is Christopher Columbus celebrated throughout Italy? And they kind of look at you and you're like, why? No, not really. In fact, any other country in Latin America, you go there, you go to Mexico, you go to Colombia, you go to Venezuela, certainly not Venezuela, right? You go to Argentina, Chile, you're like, hey, what do you guys think of Christopher Columbus? And they kind of look at you and be like, I don't know. I mean, for us, our boy is Simon Bolivar, or some other people, right? Columbus is just one of those, whatever, right? So why is Columbus, emulated so much in the United States? Largely because of socio-political choice, right? We don't have Henry Hudson Day. We don't have Giovanni Verrazzano Day. We don't have Lewis and Clark Day, but we have Columbus Day. And it's not like, Columbus Day was one of those things that just began with the founding fathers. I mean, don't expect, John Hancock and everyone else in Philadelphia in 1776 going, I ain't signing that Declaration of Independence unless we get a fucking Columbus Day on here. No, that's not the case at all. All right, so what about other symbols? Well, how about this one? How about the narratives that come from this symbol, right? Now, I mentioned in a previous lecture that most people will just collectively refer to this as the Confederate flag. And some of the people that call it that are actually people who would fly this. This is not the quote-unquote Confederate flag. This is, if anything, the flag that was used by the Army of Virginia. But we don't really care about the specifics. Today we'll just simply call it the Confederate flag. And as such, right, the flag is effectively a symbol for many people of racism, of slavery, of white supremacy, of xenophobia, right? And you come up with that rationale by saying, well, it depicts a form of government that, effectively seceded from the United States because they didn't want to give up owning people. And what's even more so is that the people who fly the flag today tend to be individuals that, while not advocating for the reintroduction of slavery, certainly favor a number of rather egregious and, unconventional political and cultural viewpoints. This is not a flag that's flown by, woke progressives. And yet there will be others that say that despite the negative connotation, this flag embodies quote unquote Southern pride, right? Or Southern heritage, which is, a relatively new way of trying to rehabilitate a symbol that is still too soon, right? But when you say that this is Southern pride and Southern heritage, right, you can pretty much figure that the narrative used by the people who defend it are, telling you, well, there's more to the South than just slavery, but it's, tradition and and friendliness and personal honor and other stuff like that, right? The trouble is that it's never really described. You have to kind of assume that that's what it means. Because in other instances, when people say Southern pride and Southern heritage, you're like, well, yeah, hate to break it to you, Southern heritage had slavery. Oh, and another thing, once slavery was done, Southern heritage had Jim Crow laws, right? It had full-blown apartheid up until and through the 1960s. So the people that use this flag, more often than not, tend to be people that are not really all that interested in integrative political culture. But they tend to use it as a way of promoting and upholding a certain skin color, a certain ethnicity, and a certain collectively understood beleaguered, political status. Okay. Now, with all of that said, right, let's get back to some good old note taking here. Right, collective memory, which I'll just abbreviate as CM, is very much selective memory. So within the two faces of culture, this is Abner Cohen all the way, right? Just absolutely all the way. And we can verify that by drawing from existing literature on the role of memory, of which there is just a plethora within the social sciences. One of the founding theorists about on memory, specifically collective memory, is the French philosopher Maurice Halbwachs. And Halbwachs understands collective memory to be an organic part of social life that is continuously transformed in response to society's changing needs. I mean, if that isn't Cohen, I don't know what is. An organic part of social life, which implies that there is direct, some agency, right? Some man-made input in shaping, directing, reshaping this understanding of memory, continuously transformed in response to society's changing needs. That is, right, old symbols for new beliefs. Just what we talked about last time around. Pierre Nora extends our understanding of collective memory by noting that it is in permanent evolution, open to the dialectic of remembering and forgetting, vulnerable to manipulation and appropriation, susceptible to being dormant, and periodically revived, once again placing it firmly within the hands of people with power and authority to shape collective thought and belief. Yael Zerubbabel understands collective memory as something that can transform historical events into political myths that function as a lens through which group members perceive the present and prepare for the future. So in this sense, right, Zerubbabel, who does extensive work on collective memory and political identity of modern Israeli politics, notes that this is easily used as a political tool that doesn't just shape group identity, but political group identity, right? So once we add the political element to that, well, now we've got, right, the possibility of taking these ideas and preferences and putting them within some kind of state authority. I'll get to that in just a quick moment here. But at the same time, right, according to Barry Schwartz, who wrote this fantastic article on the evolutionary understanding of George Washington, and I use this article in my politics and culture class. Collective memory, given the constraints of recorded history, right, the past cannot be literally construed. It can only be selectively exploited. So once again, right, collective memory interprets the past, but it cannot make the past up. It is not a case of anything goes as far as identity. Collective memory can use and abuse the past, memory, identity, and beliefs. But as Schwartz tells us, there are a certain number of core truths and principles that cannot be deviated from if this memory is to focus on certain symbols and certain narratives. So collective memory needs to be rooted somewhere. Hence, our guy, Clifford Geertz, comes waltzing back in, telling us you can have fun, but within a designated area of maneuverability. Right? Collective memory, in this case, is a reading of history within contemporary socio-cultural lenses. In other words, right, it's never a straight reading of history. And look, let's be perfectly honest. Sometimes we don't want a straight reading of history. Straight readings of history provide ambiguities, demystify certain people that we want to deify, and don't directly demonize the people that we want to condemn, right? So collective memory serves as a means to an end, right? But we are not deviating so much from history, so much from factual evidence that, no one's going to believe us, right? That's the thing. If collective memory provides a narrative, it needs to be understood and accepted by what Benedict Anderson in his chapter on page 75 notes as consuming publics. You can say whatever you want, but if the public calls BS on you, they're not going to take it seriously. And, you'll just be relegated to the loony fringe on the internet. So there's got to be a core factual truth from which these memories and narratives are derived from, right? Unarguable events, people, epics from the past, okay? And once you've got that, right, you can create a screenplay, right? That allows you to tell a story, but a story with familiar figures and familiar, events. The way that I like to describe it is this: if you want to get into more, let's say, pop cultural sense, you can make as many Superman movies as you want. You can write as many Superman comic books as you want. But if you're going to do Superman, right, there's a couple of non-negotiable truths that you need to have in order for it to be Superman, right? Superman has to have certain abilities. He has to look a certain way, dress a certain way, right? The origin story of Superman, right? He comes from Krypton, which has now exploded. He lives and works in the city of Metropolis. His alter ego is Clark Kent. He's got somewhat of a girlfriend, whatever, named Lois Lane. When he wants to retreat from society, he's got his Fortress of Solitude, and one of his arch nemeses is Lex Luthor. In the same way you want to do a Batman story, right? You got to start with the basics, right? Batman is Bruce Wayne, whose parents are dead. He lives in a big mansion with a butler named Alfred in a city called Gotham. He might have a sidekick. He might not. If he does, that sidekick is not Elmer Fudd. It ain't Aquaman. It ain't anybody else. It's Robin, right? His big arch nemesis, there could be a number of people. It could be the Penguin. It could be Poison Ivy. It could be Mr. Freeze. But, if you want to make a movie where everybody's going to buy a ticket to see, it's got to be Joker, right? So if Batman's arch nemesis is, Darth Vader or whatever it is, okay, that's one hell of a crossover, but that's not a Batman movie. You want to do Spider-Man, right? Spider-Man's got to be, Peter Parker, who lives in Queens with his, aunt. What's his, aunt? I forget the aunt's name. He's got a, little girlfriend, whatever, named Mary Jane, whatever it is, and he's got spider abilities, right? And every one of these superheroes has certain specific strengths and certain weaknesses, right? You show kryptonite to Superman, he's going to, curl up and die. You put kryptonite in front of Spider-Man, and he'll be like, well, that's cool. What do you want me to do with this? So the idea is that if you can make up a narrative, but it's got to be rooted somewhere. So that's why, especially in politics, when, you've got these talking heads on TV or these statesmen, whatever, that are talking about why things are the way that they are around the world. And at some point, they're just sort of like, why are you all caught up in culture? Forget the past. That thing happened centuries ago. Get over it. I'm like, okay, easier said than done. Easier said than done. Someone tells America to get over whatever kind of historical grievance we have, and we're going to tell them to, go and pound salt. So, in this sense, narrative, it can be organic and it can be creative, but you got to be rooted somewhere in order for us to know, when does Chinese food stop being Chinese food, right? When does barbecue stop being barbecue? When does Star Wars stop being Star Wars? When does The Simpsons stop being The Simpsons? And we're like, and you always get that one critic that's like, that's not Star, whatever it is, right? Oh, speaking of Star Wars, that's why everybody hates the sequels, because it has no commonality with the original trilogy. All right? People are like, that's not Luke Skywalker. That's why we love The Mandalorian. We love The Mandalorian because it's like, that's Star Wars. That's Luke Skywalker right there. Look at that. There's Boba Fett. There's Bo-Katan. Oh, they mentioned Grand Admiral Thrawn. This is awesome. Why? Because Filoni and Favreau play with culture as they know you can write a story, keep it familiar to the people, and booyah, this is what we want. Depart someplace completely different, and don't matter how many lightsabers you have, that ain't Star Wars. All right, I'm getting a little nerdy right about now, right? So culture has to be rooted somewhere, and rooted through a sophisticated network of narratives and symbols. Everything that I just described to you in pop culture, that's the rooted narrative, that's the rooted symbol. That's why, right? That's why Batman Dark Knight was such a fantastic movie, because of how true it was to the canon. That's why Mandalorian has been praised as the best Star Wars thing since Return of the Jedi, since it, because of its, reference, its connection to the canon. So if we have now accepted the idea that collective memory shapes and reinterprets the past, what does this mean for contemporary political studies? Well, on one way, the past, certain elements of the past can be glorified. right? Elements, certain places of the past can be remembered, commemorated, praised, taught as a veritable golden age. A period. It could be a decade, could be a couple of years, could be, like whatever. A golden age that once was lost at some point and, should be resurrected. Every group, sort of has this. Every group, every national group has, one decade or something like that, right? That they look to longingly. And sometimes the further separated they are from that period, the more that period is praised and selectively remembered for its virtues, over its vices. One of the most recent examples of this is Donald Trump's 2016 political motto, right? Make America great again, which implies that at some point America was great, lost its way, and Trump is going to restore it, right? He's going to restore time-honored traditions of our ancestors. Those ancestors could still be, boomer voters or whatever it is, right? But it's the good old days, which, usually for, let's say, white American conservatives tends to be the 1980s. Some of the more older ones might remember the 1950s, although at this point, I don't want to say that memory of the 50s is fading, but, memories of the 50s oftentimes come with a lot of other unsavory things that people who think the 50s were great, tend to overlook. One of them was still, segregation is still a big thing. Rampant, diseases like, polio and smallpox and, other elements like that. But, these things are filtered out. On the opposite end of the spectrum, the past can be demonized. Right? There are certain elements in the past that a group can not want to forget. No, they don't want to forget it at all. But they want to have you remember that it was a time of oppression, of domination, of ignorance, of suffering, and a time for us to remember for what not to do or to have never happened to us again, right? So, American political culture is not going to deny the institution of slavery, but we are going to remember it as a dark period in our history. Germany is not going to deny its role in the Holocaust, but it is going to use that period, right, as a way of remembering, healing, asking for forgiveness, building monuments and commemorations to all of those who were killed in this, mass genocide. So, especially for a country, let's say, let's say, I don't know, Mongolia, remember or recognize the Holocaust. Maybe they do, but it doesn't have anything to do with them for the most part. For Germany, yes. For Poland, yes. For most of Europe, yes, right? And especially for Germany, right? Germany's at the forefront of commemorating and memorializing, right, these crimes. The past can also be contested, right? As I mentioned, some elements of the past could be seen as a golden age for some, and at the same time be understood as a time of oppression, subjugation, and subordination for others. So when people talk about the nostalgia of the golden age of Americana in the 1950s, right, where manufacturing was great, people were, buying homes for the first time, people had cars and appliances, America was at the forefront of, economic, industrial output, all right? It was a great time to be alive if you were a specific type of person, usually tending to be white, waspy, male, and property owner, If, and when we talk about, the nostalgia of the, 1950s America, well, we're talking about what? New York, Detroit, Cleveland, LA, we're not talking about Biloxi, Mississippi. We're not talking about Mobile, Alabama, right? The 1950s, if it's remembered in such a ways, doesn't take into account segregation, doesn't take into account the pervasiveness of the Ku Klux Klan, does not take into account the still noted subordinate role of women, and I'm not even just and not even just people of color, but in many cases, certain whites that were not regarded as fully white, right? We're talking about, let's say, Catholics, for instance. There was still a large degree of suspicion, especially in the American South. So for those that want to, bring back the days of what this country used to be, there's going to be another group that's like, well, what are you remembering? Because I can come up with something completely different in that sense. Or the Roaring 20s, right? People say, oh, the 20s were great. Money was pouring in. People were just getting rich. And it's like, oh, this is you just reading an F. Scott Fitzgerald book. 1920s was also, the years before the Great Depression, but bro, there was severe poverty in the rural areas, and if you really want to talk about how awesome the 1920s were, let me tell you about organized militant labor. Now, you probably forgot about this about a century ago, but the United States back in 1921, and I would even say even a decade earlier before the First World War, man, we had some of the most violent labor movements in the world. You want to talk about people getting upset that Bernie Sanders is calling for a $15 minimum wage. Back in the day, someone wanted $15 and people said no, they'd burn your house down. They'd find the foreman and lynch them. Okay, so again, what are we talking about? What are we remembering? And what are we forgetting? Either deliberately or just because you didn't hear about it, you didn't learn about it, right? So with all of that said, I want to take this now into the final stage of this discussion. And I know that this is a lot, but I'm hoping that this stuff helps clarify a lot of the material from your 3 readings. There's one thing that we haven't brought into the discussion just yet, but it's very important, and that is the state, right? And more specifically, the authoritative structure of state government. Collective memory at this point largely assumes the presence of some structural order to define and shape how a group remembers the past. Right? There's got to be, some leadership, some organization, some kind of control on information. Pamphlets and newspapers and reading clubs and other elements like that. But if we've already established that there are alternative collective memories, oftentimes to the same thing, right? It presupposes that these institutions vary by orientation, place, membership, and time. And again, this is nothing controversial, this is nothing problematic. We just simply walk away by saying that, there's multiple collective memories for one thing, hence, the conflict. But here's a $64,000 question. What explains the official political culture of a state, right? What decides the national history? Who decides the holidays, the monuments, right? What makes one memory the official memory of a group? And in this case, I'm talking about a national group. If there's dozens of collective memories, what differentiates the official, the top, from all others? And that is the concept of historical memory. Historical memory. Again, big vocab word here. We spent a lot of time talking about collective memory to get a sense of what historical memory is. In the plainest sense of the word, historical memory is state-sponsored collective memory. Let me repeat that again. Historical memory is state-sponsored collective memory. It is a collection of narratives about the past that the state-sponsored elites share and reify into non-negotiable truths to explain current political, social, cultural, and economic circumstances. So the state wields a certain degree of authority and finality over a particular reading of the past and a formation of collective identity. And of all the words in that definition, probably the one that you most likely don't know is the word reify. Right? Reify is simply to make something true. Right? Make something true. And how do we make it true? The state puts its authority behind it. Right? The state awards benefits for following this narrative, and it will enact certain penalties and repercussions for people who don't. And that doesn't mean that if you don't go along with the state narrative, you're going to go to jail. It just simply means that you'll be much more, let's say, stigmatized in the public, right? Disregarded as somewhat, outside, extremist, deviant, whatever it is, right? Now, how does a historical memory come about? Well, there's really two ways. Historical memory is either one collective memory narrative that somehow just makes it, right, into state canon. It's appropriated by the state, right? It's an existing, ready-to-go one. The state looks at this, state officials look at this and say, hey, I like that. Let's bump that up to the federal level. Let's bump that up to the national level. Or it could be a collection of a number of previously existing collective memories that state officials will amalgamate and, once again, Frankenstein into a new meta-narrative. Right? Now, however way it happens, it's either a, one-move evolution, or I'll take, of the 5 big collective memories of the state, I'm going to take these 3. I'm going to take a little bit from 1, a little bit from 3, and a little bit from 4, and forget 2 and 5. And booyah, right? There it is. So these narratives, right, are a systemic appropriation of historical events, places, individuals, and identities that are all wrapped in symbolic meaning and interpretation, and they are given authority and legitimacy by the state. It doesn't necessarily mean that this official reading of history is something that everybody is going to follow, but even if you don't believe it, if you feel that it is completely bogus, you know that you kind of have to toe the line, right, in order to be taken seriously. So, rather than being rather than the past being the disjointed past, right, collective memory, and more importantly, historical memory, ascribe ownership to history, right? Ownership to history. So, whether it is at the subnational group level or the collective state level, ownership of history means that, we look at things in our general area, this land, this landmark, that building over there, this language that we speak, this king from 500 years ago, this battle from 700 years ago, this contribution to civilization 1,000 years ago, well before the modern state was founded. All of that is ours. All of that is ours, right? So that's why, and you probably have heard this at some point, your relatives, you might even have said this, right? When you say things like, when our ancestors did this, right? When we landed on Plymouth Rock, when we built the pyramids, when we won the Revolutionary War, when we did, and it's like, well, you didn't do anything, right? You didn't do anything, I mean, right now as I'm recording this, I think the Super Bowl is happening. You want to talk about collective group identity? I don't even know what teams are playing. I'm sorry to say this, but, if one of your teams is the one that is playing, you get emotionally involved in that. If your team wins the Super Bowl or the World Series or the whatever it is, right? Or the World Cup, right? You're walking like, on cloud 9. It's like, we won. You didn't do anything. You just sat there and watched it on TV. And if your team loses, you're like, oh, we lost. I take this as a personal blow. It's like, well, again, you didn't do anything. You just sat there. Other people did it. You attach yourself to this. That's the whole idea. It ascribes ownership to past events. So the Egyptians saying the pyramids are ours. The Greeks saying it doesn't matter how long Istanbul exists. Istanbul is built on the foundations of Constantinople. And it doesn't matter how many minarets you put around Hagia Sophia, it's structurally built to be a church, right? The mihrab is off center. It's not a full mosque. Therefore, it's ours, right? And it doesn't matter if it's bragging rights or whatever it is, right? It's an ownership of history, right? An ownership. The way the United States will still feel, so proud about, the D-Day landings or winning World War II. And oftentimes you tend to forget that Soviet Union was part of the whole damn thing as well, right? But that's the whole thing, right? Historical memory creates a collective national groupthink. a national group identity, which means that it is far more hegemonic than any other social reconstruction of the past. Why? Because this stuff is embedded in national educational curriculums, is written about as matter of fact in mainstream media and talked about on television, is represented through annual holidays and commemorations. And, if you grow up knowing all of this, you take all this stuff for granted. You take this stuff as literal truth. Now, that's not to say that you've been lied to. I'm not here to Morpheus you. I'm just simply saying that this type of hegemonic thinking, even to people who find it problematic and want to break away, still will root themselves within many of these cultural and ethnic characteristics, right? So the relationship between historical memory and hegemony cannot be overstated, because the state, by appropriating one narrative, makes it the narrative, the official narrative, right? And over time, just becomes matter of fact, right? Taken for granted. And as I said, a lot of this taken for grantedness is reinforced through state-sponsored commemorations of the past. And even though this might be some type of, I don't want to say false history, I like to say maybe fictive history, right? The way in which the Americans will remember the Revolutionary War, right? We don't know every battle. We don't know every maneuver. We don't know every little detail. We know a couple of things. We know Lexington and Concord. We know Bunker Hill. We know George Washington was there somewhere. We know the British lost, right? That was it. We tend to forget that at least a third of the American colonists openly collaborated with the British, like were hardcore loyalists. Another third, right, were absolutely committed to independence. And the other third were, your fence sitters, your undecided voters. We like to think all Americans rose up against the British in the name of liberty against tyranny. No, that really wasn't it, right? Back in the day, most of the colonial uprisings were seen by the British as just a, periodic insurrection that needed to be put down. But we won the war, and, well, the rest is history. If we had lost the war, and let's say we ended up still being a British colony, or we were given independence, I don't know, a couple decades, a century or so later, would we remember George Washington in the same way? Would we remember the events in the same way that we do? Most likely not. But the point to be made here is that fictive history is worked into non-negotiable truths, right? Heaven help you if you think outside of this conventional norm. And the reason why these truths are non-negotiable is because they are disseminated through education, literature, artwork, civic groups, hell, even peer pressure, right? Even political peer pressure, right? You want to be that maverick who thinks outside of conventional political norms. You might be correct. You might be absolutely correct about what you're saying. But your peers and your contemporaries will pressure you to get right back into the status quo because, God forbid, you should rock the boat. So historical memory is a narrative of collective identity that is accepted by the people as lawful, traditional, and I like to use the word epic, because states will oftentimes rewrite their national history to make the founding of their country unique, right? I don't think that there's a country out there. I could be wrong. I haven't read every single one. But I really would be hard-pressed to see that there's a country out there whose national history, the state was like, yeah, we really didn't do anything in history. We just kind of were like here until we decided to raise a flag and, that was it. Every country has some kind of epic story that depicts the foundations of the country, right? And I don't know what it is, but I know that in the United States we love to make American history some kind of unique, God-given, miracle or whatever it is. It's like, look, I'm sure the Canadians have, a neat story as well. The Cubans, the Mexicans, the Uruguayans most likely have something that makes them unique or at least stand out from, their Argentinian or Brazilian neighbors or whatever it is. But whatever it happens to be, this becomes what Zerubbabel calls a master narrative, right? A master narrative that defines the history of the group. Now, with all of this being said, right, I'm talking about stuff at the national level. These things are still present at the group collective memory, right? Group identity is going to take these narratives for themselves, right? And they're going to see it as non-negotiable. They're going to use that, right, as a master narrative. So, again, what is the difference between collective and historical memory? If there is any difference at all, historical is simply state-sponsored. It is a top overarching narrative. Collective memories can exist at the group level, but they are no less hegemonic to that group. The narratives are no less non-negotiable to their adherents. Okay? But historical memory just provides an overarching state authority to that. Now, in both cases, and here is where Anderson comes into the story, because you're probably wondering, okay, where does Benedict Anderson in his crazy chapter fit in? The notion of print capitalism, right, the term that he uses for that chapter, is one of the primary ingredients, one of the primary components to not only crafting collective memory, but also, and most importantly, turning previously debatable collective memories into one non-negotiable historical memory. So while the chapter focuses on the creation of national languages for a number of European states in the 19th century, I'm less interested in you learning about the, codification of the Hungarian or the Ukrainian or the Greek language. Although, to be fair, right, it is interesting to point out that languages that we speak today are in fact crafted and created, right? The language that you speak now, if you speak Spanish or French or Italian or Serbo-Croatian or Russian, might be very different from what people spoke a century or two ago because of the standardization and modernization of that language. Right? When you learn a foreign language in a college, right, you're going to learn Spanish or French or Arabic, right? You oftentimes will not learn the colloquials. You won't learn the slang, Chinese, German, whatever it happens to be, right? You kind of learn a standard textbook language. And that is largely a product of print capitalism. Okay? I remember when I was in middle school, and we were learning Spanish. Started learning Spanish in the 7th grade, 8th grade. I remember this distinctively, right? And for whatever reason, the textbook that taught us Spanish had us learn the Spanish word for car as coche, right? As coche. And we took this word as literal truth until basically, our 11th or 12th grade in high school. Until we come up to native Spanish speakers, right? And again, this is Latin America, so, Mexican, Dominican, Cuban, whatever it is. They all look, I remember I was mentioning this to somebody whose primary language was Spanish, and she looks at me and she's like, coche? Who uses, no one says coche. We just say carro. Like, really? No, yeah, carro. No one says coche anymore, right? But if you don't know, right, the colloquial, people are going to, pass you off, okay, so you learn this language by textbook, right? Now, that's not necessarily bad. I don't want to say that print capitalism steers you away from this, but if we take print capitalism's uses beyond, let's say, language standardization, we understand print capitalism to be the creation and dissemination of information for previously unprivileged groups. So, if language is standardized and codified and presented to an otherwise illiterate group of people who, within a generation, maybe not them, but their children, who now all of a sudden go to a standardized primary school and are taught to read and write in a particular language, suddenly within a generation, we have a group of literate individuals. And this is what print capitalism effectively does. is that it replaces, right, previous forms of communication that otherwise were the vocation of the upper classes, the aristocracy, the nobility, with a more common form of communication. So whereas at some point, right, you rose the ranks of intellectualism, you stopped speaking your own local language and you spoke a more high language, right? So Anderson kind of mentions at some point, in Czech society, this is in Central Europe, right? Czech was considered to be a peasant language, a language of farmers. You got higher up in university, guess what? You ultimately ended up speaking German. In something as recent as the Soviet Union, right? Especially if you were living in Central Asia, whether it was Kazakhstan or Tajikistan or whatever it was, right? Yeah, your local languages are there, but they're also, again, the language of the peasantry. They're the language of the working class. At some point, you rise through the ranks of, political society, intellectual society, business, economic society, and you end up speaking Russian. That's just a common language. What print capitalism does is say at some point to these people, you don't have to speak another language. You can speak your own. Because we're now going to codify it. We're going to put it in dictionaries. We're going to teach it in schools. We're going to speak it, on news shows. And while it's not going to replace the higher language, if it's like German or Russian, but it's going to make it more accessible to other people. So it is the standardization of previously inaccessible information. Now, if you want to go beyond language, and you want to talk about narrative, you want to talk about symbols, well, print capitalism does the same thing. Print capitalism standardizes previously fluid symbols, meanings, and identities, and through the use of the printed text, through dictionaries, through history books, through literature, all of these previously interpretive, do-it-yourself ways of speaking and remembering are now standardized, especially at the historical memory level, by state-supported printing shops, boards of education, publishing companies, right? And within a generation, a group could be unified through this type of standardization into one national language. There's this fantastic book. It was published in the 1970s by Eugene Weber called Peasants into Frenchmen. And it shows that over a brief period of, let's say, 50 years, from roughly the 1860s to the outbreak of the First World War, the country that would eventually become modern-day France, through concepts of print capitalism, right, effectively unified people across the country that spoke all sorts of different dialects with slang words, mishmash language here or there into a standardized, codified French, right? And this is actually a good way of looking at it. Print capitalism will either diminish a dialect or turn one dialect into a language. Because what's the difference between a dialect and a language? The way that I like to say it, a language is a dialect with a flag, a dictionary, and an army, right? The languages that people speak today could have existed beforehand as dialects, but just through the power of the state says, nah, this is the one that we're going to speak, right? Standard Italian comes from Florence. Standard German is Northern German, not Southern German. Standard Greek is a deliberately designed and modified Greek that was purposefully done to purge the language of all previously existing foreign words, Turkish words, Arabic words, Slavic words. If a word that was used with a different word could be replaced by an existing word in classical Greek from God knows how long ago, well, it was going to go in the dictionary. And if people back then were like, hey, what are you doing? The goal was, who cares about what people then were thinking? We care about what your kids are going to think. Your kids are going to learn the Greek language through this curriculum, and that's what they're going to be speaking. So another thing that print capitalism does, and that's why Anderson's chapter is so bloody important. I know it might be the more difficult to read, but here's where I'm trying to get to. Print capitalism transforms culture as practice into culture as system. The stuff that we take on faith, the stuff that we are like, that's tradition. We don't deviate from tradition. You know what that effectively implies? That tradition at some point might have been fluid, a new thing. All those foods that we consider to be ethnic that grandma makes during the holidays that we think, oh, we have to have this. After they die, I have to learn how to make this. Grandma could have easily have picked that up off the back of a box of Betty Crocker or whatever it was, right? But because of repetition and standardization, it becomes, boom, that's what it is. That's what I'm used to. So print capitalism, if it transforms culture as practice into system, it also transforms collective memory into historical memory, right? So if you want an equation of how one makes it to the official level of the state, print capitalism at the state level will codify one narrative among many, and then just say, well, maybe not immediately, but you get the idea, at least over time, no, this is just how it's going to be. This is how it's going to be. This is how it's going to be taught, and at some point, people are just going to take this on faith. They're going to take this absolutely for granted. So who are these people? Who are these people that perform this type of print capitalism, right? They are socio-political elites who contribute to the foundational narratives of the people. They can be intellectuals, they can be academics, philologists, grammarians, historians, artists, intellectuals, statesmen, people of influence, oftentimes who have access to publishing. And if they have a sympathetic ear of the state, the book that they published can get adopted by the state and now, placed into boards of education. So they are people or groups with the ability to shape education, identity, and collective beliefs. Right? Churches or religious institutions, media outlets, charismatic intellectuals and individuals. The Board of Education is a fantastic example of print capitalism. All sorts of founding fathers that just kind of create trends that no one wants to deviate from, but all of them reify narratives into these non-negotiable truths, which I will say once again will be noticed that this is happening as it's happening, but the goal is a generation or two later, we kind of look to this and say, well, that's our heritage. That's what we have to uphold and defend. And so, just some examples of print capitalism throughout history. Some you might find a little bit more familiar, really, than others. Probably the one person most responsible for shaping Christianity the way that it is today is not Jesus Christ, not even St. Paul, but the Roman Emperor Constantine, who in the early 4th century convened a church council in the town of Nicaea, which is now in present-day Turkey. And effectively, Constantine's, brought in dozens of bishops and saints and theologians and other people, and he said, in so many words, Christianity needs to be standardized across the Roman Empire. Right? Every geographical region has a different version of what happened, a different understanding of the nature of God, and what I want to do is corporatize the whole thing. I want to standardize it. So he sits there and he listens to bishops and other people, talk about this interpretation versus that interpretation, and it's up to him to decide what goes into the official collection of writings and what gets discarded. And the stuff that was accepted goes into this thing called, you may have heard of it, the Bible, And, the 4 Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the few epistles of St. Paul, the Acts of the Apostles, this, that, the other thing, right? That's not the definitive collection of Christian writings. There's other Gospels. There's the Gospel of St. Peter. There's the Gospel of Thomas. There's allegedly the Gospel of Judas Iscariot. There's even a Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Whatever reason, these are the deleted scenes that don't make it into the final cut of the movie. And it just, gets disseminated. And you want to also talk, you want to keep in Sunday school for a minute. The modern day English Bible is oftentimes referred to as the King James Version, right? Now you got to think to yourself, who's this King James? King James was some English king back in the day that decided to translate the Bible from either Latin or Greek into English. And, he has the authority, he's the king. And the wording is basically that for the past, 500, 400, whatever years or so. And, a lot of things can get lost in translation. A lot of things can be deliberately mistranslated, but because it hits a publishing house, kind of there it is. So, there's a lot of people are like, hey, look, if we look at the King James Version of the Bible, and we read the Bible in the original Greek that it was written in, the story kind of is pretty much the same thing, but there's a lot of interpretations in many of these passages that, might have been lost in meaning since King James, but we're still kind of reading it today. What about, I'm sure all of you have a copy of this, the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, right? You ever think to yourself, who's Merriam and who's Webster? Well, there's actually two Merriams, George and Charles, and they teamed up with this guy, Noah Webster. And all three of them, in so many words, decided that they were going to codify the English language, or the American English language. Here's the words, this is how it's spelled, this is what it's defined as, there it is. You ever wonder why certain words are spelled the way that they are in English? Ever wonder why, ham, H-A-M, lamb, L-A-M-B. Where do we get the B from? I don't know. But if I spell lamb L-A-M, it's a completely different word. Ever wonder why house and mouse? What's the plural? Well, what's the plural of mouse? Mice. What's the plural of house? Not heis, but houses. So if someone says, oh, look at those two pretty heists on the hill, people are like, what the hell are you talking about? And, why is that? Well, in so many words, the dictionary and the grammar basically dictates us as such. And, this goes for other languages. Adamantios Korais standardizes modern Greek. Vuk Karadžić standardizes modern Serbian. Taras Shevchenko standardizes modern Ukrainian. And even within pop culture, right, you probably have heard of the Dracula story, right? You know elements of what Dracula is and what he looks like and what he does. The concept of Dracula is largely the product of Bram Stoker with his book, Dracula. But Stoker has taken a number of previously existing myths and narratives about vampirism from, original Serbian and Romanian mythology. And while not directly going there and getting it directly, he's picking up some of these things from, existing pulp fiction novels and books in, London, England, Scotland at the time, right? But the concept of a vampire, which is written into, right, as I said, Serbian and Romanian, I don't want to say like mythology, but like Christian mythology, right? There's a pamphlet, there's a book in the Serbian Orthodox Church published sometime in the 1700s. In so many words, is titled, So You Have a Vampire Plaguing Your Village, and What to Do About It. Right? How to properly kill a vampire. And the church officials are like, okay, if you have a vampire in your village, you have to do this and this and this and this and this, certain burial principles, certain prayers to be made. This is where we get things like, wooden stake and, garlic and holy water and this and that and that and this. Stoker, by the time this stuff reaches him, it's already been diluted through a number of, recycled stories and interpretations, like the old telephone game. But when he writes his book, which becomes monumentally successful, the vampire takes on a whole new non-negotiable set of principles, which within pop culture, spawns a whole bunch of movies and video games, and we even have a breakfast cereal, Count Chocula, named after Count Dracula or whatever it is, right? And that takes on new standardized connotations. The whole concept of Count Dracula is actually a hybridization of two historical figures, Vlad Tepes, a Wallachian prince of the 15th century, and Petar Blagojevich, an actual village vampire from the Serbian village of Zarozhia, which I'm sure you all know about, right? And kind of brings the two together, and he creates this composite character called Count Dracula, which has kind of now become a timeless icon. Finally, this one you've never even heard of him. You want to talk about, who standardizes the World Wide Web? A man by the name of Tim Berners-Lee. I don't know if you ever met him. I don't know if you ever know who he is. But the man is largely responsible for, inventing the internet, and writing the code for the World Wide Web, right? WWW, right? So they run the gamut. They are there. They are influential, right place, at the right time. Now, as we are coming to a close, and I know that this lecture is a bit longer than others, but I hope that you found this stuff to be interesting, and I hope that you have found this to be helpful in understanding the readings. It is important to note that historical memory is very much similar to collective memory, right? But with the institutional support and authority of the state. So everything that collective memory is, historical memory also is, right? But the state assigns one official version of the past, of identity, and of culture. So if there's one thing that differentiates historical from collective, right, it is that the state gets behind this narrative and says, yep, this is the one that we are appropriating, right? So in this sense, right, culture is understood to be a filter for groups that can accept certain things, reject other things, modify third things, right? So this, diagram is effectively colored for, scale here, right? If outside influences, right, effectively reach a culture can reject some, but oftentimes, as you see the colors here, culture can also absorb, adapt, assimilate within them to find some commonality, right? To find some modus vivendi with outside influences. But it also shows the dynamics of culture, and it helps us understand that culture is, if anything else, a human agentic and historically subjective phenomenon. So I will end with this diagram, which I hope helps you understand everything that we've talked about in this rather extensive lecture. And that is the difference between history and myth. Is oftentimes myth is what most groups sort of understand history to be, right? The myth of the American War of Independence, the myth of the American involvement in the Second World War, the myth of the Union involvement of the Civil War, or the myth of the Southern involvement, right? It doesn't mean that it's fake. Don't get me wrong. It means that there are selective interpretations on elements of history. And there could be multiple myths that are reinforced by symbols, right? Tangible and intangible. And so this creates, right, a series of narratives, a series of ways of describing the same thing. Take Columbus Day, right? The Italian-American version, the Native American version, and the actual Italian who couldn't care less. And these narratives, if given political mobility, can find their way into, right, political groups and institutions, civil societies, think tanks, lobbyists, interest groups, factions within, existing political parties. And, if we were to just simply apply the, principles of democracy or whatever it is, right, just the electoral procedure, whatever political party wins the election carries that culture, carries that set of narratives with them to then become the socio-political discourse. Okay? And if we understand this to be historical memory, then ideas that begin here, that are highly interpretive and shape a specific identity of a group, if given institutional political power and mobility, can in turn become a culture that is now disseminated for all other groups. Again, these groups don't have to consciously and morally agree with this narrative, this historical memory, but they know that there are penalties and costs for defection. So oftentimes, if historical memory becomes pervasively paramount over years and decades, it just becomes accepted as literal truth by most citizens who don't even think that this is something that has been given to us from above. It's just the natural order of things, which is very much how we understand hegemony to be. And it's within all of this, ladies and gentlemen, okay, that we will look beginning next week on specific narratives that form specific group identities for various socio-political, socio-economic, and socio-ethnic groups. So this week was really just theory week, building week, get this stuff down, and then next week we're going to start applying this stuff to more specific examples. But you need to get this stuff down now in order to understand the importance and the nuances of what we'll be talking about next week. So this isn't really the end. This is just the end of part one. This is the getting ready. This is the warm-up stage. Now, next week, we're going to talk about specifics within American political culture. So I hope that you found this stuff interesting. I hope that you've stayed with me all the way until the end. And I hope that after this, the readings that you did for this week are suddenly clearer and you're able to understand what was being said. Okay? You got all of that. We're going to have a fantastic group discussion for class on Wednesday. All right, so I will leave you with that. Happy reading. I look forward to your comments and your opinions, not just in the discussion forum, but also in our group chat session. So I'll see you in a couple of days. Take care.